Lusaka was now listening attentively, and soon he had listened to more than 2 hours of Abuju's talks. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. All that matters is where you're going. Abuju's words echoed in Lusaka's mind. At that moment, Lusaka remembered what the voice had told him a few days ago. You can learn from anything, anywhere, and everyone. He suddenly stopped what he was doing, went downstairs to the car, and grabbed a pen and a piece of paper. Listen to what I'm saying, people. Never let someone's opinion become your reality. You have all in your mind. Why not use it? Abuju sounded exactly like the voice. It is the only asset you have that no one can steal. It is your greatest weapon. Deal with anything in your life. Lusaka listened closely. Everything that has ever been created first started in the mind. This results from our imagination, where we preview or assume what is to come. But as we imagine, let us not get lost in the details of what should be and how it will come to be. We are continually trying to make sense of the future before deciding what we want. What we know is this: we cannot predict the future or make sense of life itself by connecting the dots going forward. Instead, let us look back at how far we have come and what we have accomplished. Abuju's life story gave Lusaka the determination to persist, especially when he felt most alone. His advice reminds me of the voice. Lusaka smiled. You will experience setbacks in your journey. Things will not go as planned. You will meet challenging times. Lusaka concentrated on Abuju's every word. Still, in times like these, great ideas are born. Great men and women are built. But to reach greatness, you will experience pressure. Upon hearing the word pressure, Lusaka's mind reflected on something he had learned from his teacher. Diamonds are formed under pressure, he would often tell Lusaka. Every night before bed, Lusaka repeated the questions Freetown had asked him. Who am I? What do I want? Why am I here? What am I grateful for? With every answer, Lusaka reminded himself to do all he could and give his best. All you can do is good enough. Considering to do all you can and leave the rest to that which is higher than you. Lusaka felt special for once in a long time about himself. Knowing that the voice would do everything in its power to get his attention, a sense of appreciation soon took the place of the isolation and loss he had been experiencing. Chapter 12. The Mouth. I recall those days when we would all pray for better days to find their way in our lives. My oh my, I wonder why the world cries. Freetown's efforts to build a community of shared values and faith had finally paid off. He started organizing more family and youth outings, trips, and recreational activities. Freetown had arranged a few hours' drive from the city for a day of bushwalking and hiking in the hills. According to those who had previously been there, the hills gave Totem Island and surrounding suburbs the best viewpoints. Everyone met at the agreed-upon meeting point on the day of the trip and rode to the bottom of the hill. After Freetown had addressed the group, he pointed to the hilltops sticking out through the greenery. They are lined up perfectly. The last one, the biggest one, is our end goal, Freetown explained. Everyone was excited and prepared for the day in their best hiking gear and mami water at the ready. Lusaka, Cairo, and the rest of the group climbed the hill with little effort. They were filled with anticipation to see an unobstructed view of the blue skies and city landscape. We need to keep moving to the next hill, announced Freetown. Lusaka noticed that the hill looked steeper than the first one, and the bushes were much thicker, which made the walking trail harder to follow. The group supported each other as they climbed the hill, offering a helping hand where needed. Once everyone reached the top, they saw that the view was well worth the effort it took to climb up the hill. A lady sat down beside Lusaka and reached for her sandwich in her bag. I want to enjoy my lunch with a perfect view. Lusaka observed the other climbers. Everyone seemed to have forgotten about the challenges they faced while climbing up. Shortly after, a dark cloud started to cover the shining sun. Everyone knew it would start raining soon. Freetown asked everyone to get ready. They would soon descend to climb the next hill, people started murmuring. Lusaka looked around. I don't think I can do this. People were starting to get tired. A few people decided they would go ahead without the group. Some decided to stay back as the rain started. The rain made the climb more challenging as the ground had become slippery and wet. This was dangerous. Wet weather meant one wrist falling headfirst into the thick forest bushes. Lusaka looked up at the third hill, which stood out from the first two. A few more people decided they could not go further. Life is like that, full of difficulties. Freetown laughed as he walked off. Lusaka and Cairo had no choice but to follow Freetown. He had given them a lift there. This means we're stuck with him till we're all done climbing, Lusaka said, turning to Cairo. On the other hand, it's good that we're spending time together. We haven't done it in a long time. Cairo smiled. Every few meters, the bushes grew less dense as the group climbed the hill. They finally reached the top and once again took in the views the hilltop offered. A fresh breeze passed over the group as others sat in silence eating their lunch. The rain had finally settled, and everyone agreed that the view was worth the challenges they had faced. I have shown you the future, the voice reminded Lusaka. Can you take a picture of me? Cairo interrupted Lusaka before he could talk to the voice. The following day, Lusaka stopped at a hardware store on his way to work. He walked around the store from aisle to aisle, looking for cleaning chemicals and products. A thought crossed his mind. What if we had something like this back home? The idea excited Lusaka, and for a moment, he believed he had a brilliant plan. This plan was Lusaka's ticket out of Totem. Having started from nothing to getting the cleaning business running, Lusaka had learned from his mistakes. He made a list of the things he had learned on the journey. His confidence was slowly developing. Lusaka researched his new idea and compiled some data to show to potential sponsors and investors. He met up with other Alkebulanders to get their views and opinions on the project. The first person Lusaka met told him boldly that the project was impossible. First, you need to become the best cleaner on Totem Island, save some money, and then you can look at expanding your business into other avenues, the man explained. This kind of problem would require significant capital and know-how. Sometimes it's good to be realistic. Lusaka drove back home, pondering the man's words. He works for a far more significant business than I do. Surely he knows what he's talking about. Lusaka was convinced. He knew that he had to put the project aside and focus on something else. Lusaka had scheduled another appointment with a prominent Alkebuland community leader. Although he felt demoralized by his previous meeting, he decided to hear what the community leader had to say. Being a cleaner for the rest of his life was not something Lusaka was looking forward to. The business client list was slowly dropping down to zero, and Lusaka had known from the start that he wanted a more stable income. When he looked 10 years ahead, cleaning was nowhere in his future plans. He wanted to do something meaningful and not just make a living. That day, on a beautiful Sunday afternoon, Lusaka and the man met at a local coffee shop. He arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, giving himself enough time to relax and cool off from the heat. He looked around every 2 seconds to see if the man had arrived. A few minutes later, a man walked towards Lusaka's table as he stared at the screen of his mobile phone. "Thank you for waiting." The man reached out his hand to Lusaka. "My name is Maputo." "Tell me about yourself." Maputo sat up straight. Lusaka looked at him. He tried to dissect the question and find answers that would interest Maputo. Lusaka believed it was curiosity, and this made him comfortable. He told him his story, including his visit to Kampanda and his current challenges. Lusaka slowly dived into self-pity. It was always great when he had an opportunity to have someone listen to him without passing judgment. He explained why he needed the warehouse idea to be a success. Maputo listened closely as he scribbled notes in his notebook. He asked Lusaka to clarify ideas he did not understand. Maputo explained to Lusaka how easy it was to get lost in negativity. "Have you heard of the 2 parts of the brain?" Maputo asked. "No, I have not." Maputo asked for Lusaka's book. Lusaka looked on curiously as Maputo drew a funnel. He drew a line through its center and labeled each part A and B. A represents the simple mind, This is where all reasoning and sense-making takes place. Maputo spoke with invigorating energy. Once the information is processed by the simple mind, it is moved on to Side B, where all data is stored. Side B builds your belief system, which influences how you act, how you do things, and the decisions you make. Maputo explained that the idea of impossibility is flawed. The human brain is designed to birth ideas. All the influential people that have lived used this part of the mind. So are you saying that the mind is like a machine or a computer? Whatever I command it to do, it can? Asked Lusaka. That's right, Maputo nodded. For a moment, there was silence as Lusaka digested the information and looked through his life. I feel stupid. How come I have not known this simple truth all my life? Directing Maputo to mind A, Lusaka asked, so what you're saying is whatever I allow to come into my mind and focus on comes to life? That's correct, said Maputo. Whatever you give energy to goes into part B, and in there, its job is to bring to life whatever it was fed, whether positive or negative. Lusaka thanked Maputo, who gently reminded him that the information was not something new. It was merely something not thought about often enough. Lusaka noticed this when conversing with the voice, and his face lit up as he thought about Maputo's words. Driving back home with this newly gained knowledge made Lusaka curious to find out more. His conversation with Maputo brought him absolute satisfaction which he could not put into words. He felt as if he had just awoken from a deep sleep. He wondered how Maputo gained that level of thinking. He too sounded like the voice, smart, wise, and well-versed in life. That evening, Lusaka laid in bed thinking of his day and how receptive he had been to Maputo's advice. He was excited and already thinking about the next experience he would encounter. Days went by as usual, but this time Lusaka's mind was filled with something different. He felt different. He could feel the fire beginning to burn in him. Yet he was confused, contemplating whether to stop or go forward with a new idea, for that is where the gold coins were. His plan was to make enough gold coins to help his people and afford them a life worth living. An idea popped into his mind, urging him to find someone who liked his people and who would like to make gold coins while helping them. In his search, Lusaka found a well-traveled guy who was knowledgeable about his people and cared for them much. Lusaka wanted to make a good first impression and asked Ren if he could show the guy around the construction building he had been cleaning. That day, Lusaka put on his best suit once again. He arrived at the site and waited for the man. A few minutes later, a man wearing a cowboy hat arrived. Lusaka observed him as he came closer. "Lusaka, is it?" "Yes," Lusaka nodded. "Denver," as he stretched out his arm for a handshake. Denver showed Lusaka the bag he carried. He had been sent as a representative to Lusaka's island to talk about how people's lives could be improved. Denver talked with real passion that Lusaka instantly admired. He took out a few of the photos he had taken when he visited Kampanda and eagerly showed them to Lusaka. Feelings of pity and sorrow for the people soon clouded the conversation as Denver showed Lusaka the pictures of some people he had helped and those of half-naked children. Lusaka saw himself in the photos. He looked at Denver, sensing the excitement in his eyes of fulfilling one of the Creator's wishes by intervening in these children's lives. Denver pulled out a stack of business cards and messages from his side pocket from contacts he had made in Kampanda. Most of the messages were from people asking Denver when he would be going back to Kampanda. Others included requests for items from Totem Island. Denver explained that he could easily gather a few things from the yearly veg collection on Totem Island to give to the people in Kampanda. Lusaka listened closely as Denver continued. He felt upstaged by Denver's passion for a place he had only visited a few times, a place he was not born in. Something must be wrong with me. Lusaka could not shake the thought. We can make gold coins here with this business you have. Denver pulled out a piece of paper with questions for Lusaka. Denver handed Lusaka the paper. Imagine if we could bring people from Alkebulan here to work as cleaners. I'm sure you know how desperate people are to leave that place for a better future here. Someone can give a leg for such an opportunity like this. It would be a dream come true. Lusaka listened diligently. There is plenty of work that people from this island won't do. You can bring people from Alkebulan here and pay them a small wage, which is better than nothing, especially compared to what they have at the moment. Lusaka was taken aback. He thought about Denver's proposal. How can I honestly let someone go through this life? Lusaka felt that he had been asking his people to become slave volunteers. Still, with little confidence to voice his opinion, he agreed with Denver. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Suddenly, Lusaka felt underwhelmed. They were yet to discuss the business idea he had. What are you doing next Wednesday? Denver asked. Come to the small business owners meeting. I would like you to meet someone who can help us pull this together. That would be great. Lusaka could not gather the courage to say no. Lusaka sat under the tree as he listened to Abuji's talks in silence. One statement caught Lusaka's attention. I'm convinced and confident of this one thing. The one who began the good work in you will continue to perfect and complete it. You did not come this far only to get this far. Lusaka had heard this statement from his grandparents and parents before. Still, he never understood who the one was. Abuji touched the thought Lusaka had had earlier. Be a student of the school of mystery, and remember, when the student is ready, the teacher will always appear. As Lusaka reflected on Abuji's message, he felt the voice. Since you have nothing left, you have nothing to lose if you do something different tomorrow. The days to come will be the same. Nothing will change. Lusaka knew that he had to take action. Time will not stop for me just because I'm going through this. I might as well waste my time following what the voice says. By this time, Lusaka knew that the feeling of loss and confusion seemed to disappear whenever he listened to the voice. The voice encouraged Lusaka to continue on his journey. Although it had not promised him immediate success, it guaranteed peace of mind. However, the voice reminded Lusaka once again, the journey you are about to embark on will not be an easy one. It will require you to work on yourself every single day. At times, you will feel lonely and misunderstood, but you will need to have the courage to ask different questions. As a student on his journey, the only time you will graduate is when you take your last breath. People will think you are crazy, but if you find a more substantial reason, you will stand the test of time, and it will help you in the hard times when the storms come. The voice had promised Lusaka that it would be by his side to present him with options. All he had to do was choose for himself. There will not be a right or wrong choice. One might take you longer than the other to reach your goal, but you will reach your destination. If a decision makes you happy, it is the right one. It might not be suitable if it does not. I will force nothing on you, but I will try to get your attention. It will be up to you to decide. If you seek me, you will find me. I will send you words of encouragement and teachings. Read and listen to these texts and words. They will inform you and educate you. They make the fool wise. If an ignorant person reads them, they will find enlightenment. Keep them in your heart. Take them as notes for yourself. The week of Denver's meeting had arrived, and anticipation of the session ran through Lusaka's mind as Cairo prepared clothes for him to wear. Lusaka arrived at the business center to meet Denver. He was welcomed by an elderly lady who showed him into a meeting room where he waited for Denver. Denver arrived shortly after. He introduced Lusaka to a lady. Meet Oslo. She is the chief executive officer of BMT, the ones who planned this event. Oslo welcomed Lusaka as she rushed to put down the fowls she was carrying. Everyone seemed to talk big about their business. Lusaka paid close attention to the talk of sales and profits and exchanged business cards with people he thought he could learn from. This is an exciting event. Lusaka found himself enjoying his time there. Still, he wondered what he would introduce himself as. Oslo's voice quickly filled the room as she welcomed everyone to that evening's meeting. We will start today's session by going around the tables to let everyone introduce themselves. We will start from the left and go around, Oslo said. Lusaka counted the heads at the table. I'm third. He sighed and felt his heart and stomach racing. The first and second guys stood up and introduced themselves. They talked a little about what they did and gave some sales projections for the coming month as they prepared to launch a new service. From the way they dressed and presented themselves, they were playing in the big league. Lusaka got up, introduced himself, and explained that he was not working on anything special. He just wanted to change his community, but was still unsure of how and what that change would be. Looking around, he could see smiles of pity and sorrow on a few people's faces. After the meeting, Denver and Lusaka stayed back, hoping to get Oslo's thoughts on Denver's idea. "Gentlemen, how can I assist?" "Oh yes, we're hoping to get your thoughts on using Lusaka's cleaning business to help people from Alkebulan Island. As you know, the rate of poverty is so high." "Yes, I see." Lusaka observed the pair. He studied Oslo's facial expressions. She seemed confused by Denver's sentiments. "How about we meet tomorrow at the office, gentlemen?" she suggested. As Lusaka and Denver walked to the car park, Lusaka asked Denver if he drove there. "No, I have issues with my eyes. My doctor has advised me not to drive at night." Knowing that the meeting would go into the night, Denver had taken a taxi to the forum. Lusaka offered to drop him off at home. He thought it would be an excellent opportunity to learn more about Denver and his story. Denver revealed a lot about himself on the journey to his house. He owned a company that was doing well, but met a few challenges. One of his customers had sued him for nearly 500,000 gold coins for a project that Denver was paid for but had failed to deliver. This forced him to file for bankruptcy, which meant that he could not conduct business for some time. Denver's doctor had also advised him to minimize his stress as he was quickly heading into hyperglycemia. After his business failure and deteriorating health, Denver explained, he decided the only hope of making a decent living was by helping the people of Alkebulan. "There are plenty of opportunities there. I also had a lot of fun, and the people receive you with open arms." In the morning, Denver called Lusaka and said that something urgent had come up. He would not attend the meeting with Oslo, but insisted that Lusaka go ahead without him. All she wants to know is how the cleaning business is doing and if it would be eligible to bring in workers from Alkebulan. "Oh yes, I can do that," Lusaka answered, knowing that Denver's plan was not something he wanted to do. "I guess it's my fault," Lusaka thought. "I showed him the enormous building where we're cleaning and he got excited." Still, he thought the meeting with Oslo would be an excellent opportunity to get her thoughts on his idea. What if they are friends? What if she tells him I presented my idea instead of talking about the cleaning business? Remembering Abuja's words, luck is when opportunity meets preparation. Lusaka gathered the materials he had prepared for his idea and took them with him, just in case an opportunity presented itself. Oslo asked Lusaka a few questions regarding the finances of the cleaning business. She told him that it would be impossible to bring in people from Alkebulan. The cleaning business is too small and it doesn't have the financial capacity for such a project. "I know little about your people or their needs, but you seem passionate about making a difference in their lives. I just don't think this is the way. I'm sure there are better ways to do it." Right there, Lusaka saw an opportunity. "I understand what you mean. That's why I've also been working on this other project," as he pulled out a few documents from his folder. "Wow, this looks interesting." Oslo looked through the pages, analyzing the funds needed to start the project. "Okay, I can make a copy of this document to have a good read through it. For now, I think there are too many products on the list. The startup capital and labor force required to pull this one out is also too big. I think you need to scale down the product list, then move forward from there." Oslo asked Lusaka to focus on one problem to solve. "You seem to know your community very well. I assume after your visit, you even have a better understanding of people's challenges in your town." Chapter 13. The Egg. As an egg hatches, a life begins, moving through life like a swift wind, to blend in with the rest, to grow to be the best. May the test of life be full of blessings. It had been a long time since Lusaka won the case against the system. The period he was given to decide what he was going to do was approaching to renew his contract. This time, Lusaka knew that they would be hard on him. They did not take such losses lightly, and most of all, they had nothing to benefit from him being a member of the system. Being a member required him to go back to full-time study, which meant that he had to repay the gold coins he owed and pay an additional 30,000 gold coins in advance to show his commitment. It was that or nothing at all. He knew very well all the cards were against him, but still, the thought of going home empty-handed did not sit well with him. He was not satisfied. Lusaka always felt that there was more to his journey, And so, he once again faced the system. He arrived at the offices one morning and took a number from the machine. His number was called out and he walked up to a counter. The officer explained that Lusaka's chances are zero because of his previous case. It will involve numerous costs, but if you could spare some gold coins and find someone to sponsor you, you might increase your chances of staying. The officer explained that he could not give any further advice or information on the situation. After the meeting, Lusaka looked into what the man had said. He found that the system allowed a member to sponsor a non-member provided the right conditions were met. Looking into it further, Lusaka and Cairo found that it would be possible to sponsor Lusaka as long as they had shared a residential address for over 12 months. Lusaka and Cairo had lived together for over 24 months, so they went ahead with the application, putting together all the gold coins they had saved up. A few weeks later, the system responded saying they would look into the application and get back to them. In the meantime, Lusaka could enjoy the privileges of being a member but was not allowed to devote any time and attention to gaining knowledge of any academic subject, especially utilizing books, travel or work, or even earn an income until they decided on his application. During this period, if he committed any offense of any kind, his application would be revoked. This is a more professional way of saying no to him, he thought. If that happened, he could simply say that he got frustrated and decided to leave on his own. The news of his application conditions came with mixed feelings of joy and sadness for both Lusaka and Cairo. The conditions of becoming a member played on his mind. He slowly bought into what the system expected from him. Lusaka and Cairo hid their worries from each other, each putting on a brave face for the other. Lusaka thought about the progress he had made over the past years. He now had to re-strategize and build himself up again. Lusaka and Cairo took their usual drive in silence that evening, the new journey weighing heavily on their minds. What would you do if you had to go to jail? Cairo's voice broke the silence. With little thought about where the question had come from or why Cairo was asking it, I would make sure I come out with something, Lusaka answered confidently. If I go in fat, best believe that I'll come out with a six-pack. They laughed. If there is free education, I am coming out with the highest degree, something substantial, but definitely not empty-handed. There you have it. Cairo smiled. Lusaka remembered what the voice had told him about becoming a student of the School of Mystery, and now it was slowly starting to make sense. It was the only option that Lusaka could see. Did you know you can shine like a brilliant star rising in the east? The voice came to Lusaka one evening as he sat under the mandarin tree, trying to figure out how he would keep himself busy or at least give himself something to live for. He was looking for a familiar road, a path he could be sure of so he could stay alert to upcoming challenges. He sat under the tree, trying to go through all the paths, but he found nothing. The only option left was to go where there was no road and leave a trail of how not to be lost or how to find one's way. I reveal myself in a million forms. Lusaka sat, thinking back to Oslo's advice on finding one problem and one solution for it. The thought of identifying this problem and its solution made Lusaka anxious, but the voice calmed him. You have a magical charm. You are a master of the world's creation. By week's end, and after days of going back and forth with the voice, Lusaka was yet to produce something of value. One evening after coming back home just before dinner, Lusaka went to have a shower. Growing up, his mother always used to say that cleaning up before dinner was a sign of respect to the person preparing the food. Lusaka stood under the shower with his eyes closed, the warm mami water dropping on his head and soaking his face. The music he was playing on his phone had suddenly stopped. He heard a voice in the distance. What is one thing you have experienced as a child or in your adulthood that you wouldn't let another person go through? In other words, what's one thing you would change if you knew nothing was impossible? Lusaka thought for a second and answered, Mami water. Recalling how he and his cousins had to wake up early morning to line up and collect mami water. Some mornings would be so cold that the boys would carry a few hot rocks to keep their hands from freezing. After collecting the mami water, they would rush back home and prepare firewood for boiling the mami water before getting ready for school. He flashed back to his last visit home, no different from the time when he was younger. Thinking back to his trip back home, Lusaka realized the many challenges he saw but was not paying attention to. Right next to his house in the village was a well his father had dug. It was still there. His aunties, uncles, nephews and nieces always used it daily. One morning on his visit, he went up to the well to collect mami water for brushing his teeth and washing his face. He remembered his uncle joking, "This well is as old as you are." They laughed about it, but Lusaka never thought for 1 second to ask what he had meant. He remembers noticing the well had no proper cover, and a few meters from there were 2 pit latrines, which were almost as deep as the well. Lusaka also remembered how, as a child, people would complain about their stomachs running all the time and how the wells would flood, mixing animal and human waste during the rainy season. Almost every household in the village experienced that challenge, and if a child in a house got sick, the parent would stay back home from work and use all their savings in times like this on healthcare. This also left a mark of disgrace on the family. One person who came to see Lusaka when he arrived was an old friend of his grandparents. She was an older lady who lived with 3 of her grandchildren. They were all below 6 years old. Their parents had died from a curable disease that had kept a grip on many communities. The grandmother had many challenges looking after her grandchildren, especially walking long distances to collect mami water. Luckily for her, Lusaka's father had assigned his cousin to fill a 20-liter container with mami water and deliver it to her house every day. She was not the only one in such a situation. Many people in the community were in a similar position. When Lusaka was young, the village chief, together with local health workers, would send out a messenger who would go around the town on a bicycle and speakerphone to remind people to boil their drinking mami water. The messenger would visit local schools and encourage kids to wash their hands after using the toilet. In the village, the mami water was constantly attacked by small organisms unseen by the naked eye. The organisms lived mostly in human, animal and bird waste. One could not tell their presence by the color of the mami water. Once the contaminated mami water is drunk, it can be extremely dangerous. It is almost like fighting the wind. The organism multiplies faster, causing stomach disorders like diarrhea. The longer one goes without treatment, the more fatal it can become. In most cases, if left untreated, people died within hours. Year in and year out, these TED-801 organisms attacked and killed millions of people, with most victims being young children below 5 years old. A similar disaster happened in surrounding communities in Alkebulan. TED-801 affects a family's income as it decreases people's economic productivity and increases healthcare costs. For many families, this means that improper access to clean mami water reduces their income and financial contribution to the well-being and development of Kampanda and Alkebulan. Lusaka remembered once as a kid, such a messenger came to their school to deliver their information. Shortly after, schools, churches and public gatherings were closed because TED-801 had spread across the village, killing people and hospitalizing many. A majority of them were children like him who had been drinking mami water from the many open sources in the village. There was no proper funeral for the victims. The leaders of the community dug large graves and held a mass burial for the deceased victims. Many people could not attend the mass funerals, not even family members, because one could contract TED-801. The more Lusaka delved into the problem, the more he felt like a failure, and the more pain and sadness he felt at the thought of it. But he remembered that the voice had asked him a simple question: what can you do about it? It made Lusaka think for a moment and not focus too solely on the problem. The information you have is enough. The question now is, what are you going to do about all these facts presented to you? Remember, never listen to or say, "This is impossible." You should find what is not visible. The Creator reveals the secrets of His creation every day. Lusaka was surprised about how much he had experienced in his life. Still, it also made him feel selfish and ungrateful because he often forgot about it. How could I not remember all that? He asked himself. He wondered whether his time away had changed him, whether it made him forget his roots. He knew he could not return home empty-handed, not when others in his shoes would have excelled at the same opportunity. Whether you become an instrument of gold or steel, iron or platinum, or whether you're big or small, rough or smooth, you have a purpose for serving. As in material things, would anyone dare assert that the carpenter's saw is less than the surgeon's scalpel? You must be an instrument, the voice comforted Lusaka. Doing nothing was not an option. How can I be okay and live freely? Lusaka wondered. The voice reminded Lusaka that he had all the time in the world so long as he was breathing. All Lusaka had to do was walk to the kitchen and open the tap to have clean mami water. He did not have to think about where the mami water came from or how it reached the house. The question of what he could do to help his community gave Lusaka a sense of new life. It was like a rebirth of his spirit. The thought of assisting his family made him excited and brought him joy. Still, he did not know what or how he would do it. The question followed him around for a few days. Nothing at that point brought him as much joy as solving that challenge and seeing people's faces happy, free, and masters of their destinies. The lack of clean drinking mami water had become an extensive business for many people from other islands outside of Kampanda and Alkebulan. Different groups of people used different methods to raise gold coins for the people of Alkebulan to help provide the solutions to their mami water crisis. They used all types of images to activate the donors' emotions to give out gold coins to help people from Alkebulan. The fundraisers had the best marketing campaigns, which played on their emotions, making them feel sorry and pity for the people. The marketers used the most negative images of Alkebulaners to get the message across, especially young children with no shirts driving the message home. But what many donors did not know is that the organizations always took care of themselves first before any of their donations reached the actual people they wished to help. Lusaka saw this when he first arrived in Totem Island. In almost every second shop, he would see a gold coin donation box set up for the starving or thirsty children in Alkebulan. Lusaka raised this act of kindness and made the shop look good in the shoppers' eyes and brought about great recognition in the society. In those children, Lusaka could see himself and his own family. He also noticed how much the imaging affected how the world perceived Alkebulan and its people. As he came to know in Totem Island, most people regarded Alkebulan as a place in need of constant help or financial support. The images he saw and the images people had about his island made him feel ashamed and thoughtless of himself. He was determined to find an answer to his problem, even in the fact of immense self-doubt and struggle. Instead of stopping, Lusaka changed the question. He asked himself what-if questions. Asking himself what-if questions made him think better. With every thought he had, he wrote them down on a piece of paper. He asked himself, what if I could find something that could kill TED 801? What if we had a solution that would put an end to this? A solution like this could mean that people could have mami water that is free of TED 801. Mami water that could be drunk with no worries of disease and illness. It could be mami water that gives them good health and strength, creating a productive future for humanity. He remembered how uncomfortable it was for him to focus on anything when he had a running stomach. Chapter 14. Caterpillar. The creature crawls and crawls, trying to find a way through walls. The life is hard, the road is long. To reach the water in the pond, drink, live, breathe, rest, go on. Lusaka supported Cairo at all costs until she completed her studies. Like Lusaka, Cairo was already a doctor to her family even before completing her senior high school education. Still, like Lusaka, those dreams had long since died. The university Cairo attended had one of the biggest and best libraries in town, with access to millions of books on any subject of interest. Every time Cairo went for classes, Lusaka would go with her and spend all his time in the library reading any book that sparked his interest. After the thoughts of finding a solution to TED 801, Lusaka would go straight to the library to read as many books and publications on Mami Water's research as he could. The only person he could share it with was Cairo, as he was afraid that others might think he was always chasing the wind. Who would trust you to clean Mami Water when you have failed at cleaning toilets? Remember what Oslo had said, no one will give you gold coins. Such perversive thoughts crossed Lusaka's mind often, but he found the courage to continue his search. This is an even bigger idea than before. he told himself. He did nothing about the concept for a few days, but it still would not leave him. One evening, the voice sent him a note. Do not judge by the smallness of the beginnings. Lusaka realized there was no difference in size between seeds that produce annual plants and those that grow into ageless trees. He could not add or subtract anything from that fact, but promised himself to continue. By this time, he had got used to going to the library so much that he would even go on days when Cairo had no classes. The thought of TED 801 in drinking mami water stayed on Lusaka's mind. He continued to read about how dangerous diseases it caused were. Many people around the world had come up with solutions to TED 801. Some solutions were exceptionally good and had promising resources and techniques to address the problem. However, Lusaka could not understand why his community was still experiencing mami water's challenges. In Alkebulan, millions of people lacked access to clean mami water, and thousands of lives were being lost daily as a result. What bothered Lusaka the most was the high number of such deaths. No matter how much he went back and forth with himself, he continually concluded that mami water was of utmost importance to all people. Mami water is the foundation of life and a great contributor to economies around the world. Lusaka found that Alkebulan was losing out because of the loss of income brought on by households and small businesses hit hard by TED 801. Who would not want to put an end to those TED 801s and save a life? He thought. He convinced himself that it would be a walk in the park and only a few people would refuse to make gold coin donations to make a difference and save lives. Upon further investigation, Lusaka noticed the two best ways others delivered their solutions to the people. The first group was traditional profit-oriented, who thought of their consumers as people who only bought their products and services. Whereas traditional non-profit-oriented groups, the second group, thought of their consumer base as beneficiaries who needed constant help of money and resources from benefactors. Lusaka was conflicted between the two groups and which one he would use. The first group showed potential to reach out to more people, but the profits had to come first. The second group made much more sense to Lusaka, but he found it limiting and heavily dependent on the benefactors, who at most times determined how their resources were used. Lusaka thought of solving this conflict. He decided to set up another group and called it Group GEM, a group that would break this traditional customer-beneficiary dichotomy by providing products and services that, when consumed, produce social value. When consumption yields both revenue and social value, customers and beneficiaries may become indistinguishable. This kind of integration, Lusaka believed, would be very powerful, in part because it resolves the deeply felt tension between mission and growth. When customers and beneficiaries are the same, focusing on growth doesn't take away resources from beneficiaries. Rather, increased sales and mission fulfillment are inseparable. In the GEM group, managers do not choose between mission and profit because these aims are integrated in the same strategy. GEM group will produce everything, both social value and commercial revenue. First, Lusaka had to find people who would support him in his newly formed group. He thought about people from afar who did not know much about him or his past. He would make sure he gave them accurate information. He searched for people who were well educated in their respective fields. He chose mature candidates for the roles as he looked for people who could provide him with the support he desperately needed. Soon, Lusaka asked Texas, Ohio, and Colorado to join Maputo, whom he had met earlier. Energies were high as Lusaka, Texas, Ohio, Colorado, and Maputo talked about the possibilities of making a difference. As time passed, Lusaka noticed that no concrete steps had been taken by the GEM group. Everyone was too busy trying to make a living outside the group, Lusaka noticed. In his search for more help, Lusaka came into contact with Berlin, a well-educated man who had spent many years traveling the world, teaching people how to operate and start groups. In their first meeting, Berlin was very interested in Lusaka's ideas and the GEM group he talked about. Lusaka saw Berlin as the best fit because he talked about the challenges of the people back home with great concern and understanding. Enthusiasm within the team was slowly waning, which left Lusaka frustrated and impatient. It felt like inviting someone for lunch who had had a heavy breakfast, yet Lusaka had not eaten for days. Lusaka realized that he had not been clear with his expectations of making his mami water venture a success, which meant that everyone just ran in circles. Soon after, he came to realize the hard truth. The team he had established were all too busy trying to feed their families through their daily jobs. They could not leave their source of income to follow him when he did not know who he was, or at least know where he was going. Things within the group slowly started falling apart as the hopes of raising funds for the group disappeared. Lusaka also felt confused after meeting Berling and receiving no feedback on his ideas. He tried to figure out if he had said or done something wrong. Lusaka had tried a few ideas in the past, but this idea on fighting TED 801 haunted him. He was always thinking about it, and the feeling of knowing that his relatives were at risk of TED 801 made him want to take a step forward, for it was the only idea that had helped him kill two birds with one stone. Taking this solution home to Kampanda meant two things: that he would finally make his parents proud, he would make a difference, and help uplift his people into a productive future. One morning, Lusaka decided to let go of the team, which made many group members very unhappy and disrespected. No one understood that the solution to TED 801 needed nurturing like a newborn baby. It had to disrupt their sleep and required special attention from the parents. Still, Lusaka had to become heavily pregnant with the idea. That morning, Lusaka received another note from the voice which comforted him. Do not let limited resources stop you. Make the best of what you have. As time passes, the function will create the organ. Some who had seemed useless turn out to be useful. The rest have to undergo a surgical operation, a painful one perhaps, and so the work goes on. Lusaka had learned to pay attention to history ever since the voice that many other people asked him about who he was. He came to the conclusion that any man who does not learn from history will repeat his mistakes. He read more about his past. To know where he was going, he had to first know where he was coming from. Lusaka also wanted to understand why his people were always in poverty as compared to those on Totem Island and surrounding areas. Lusaka wanted to know why his people had been continuously attacked by TED 801 when the other parts of the world were developing, growing, and people had freedom of choice. Lusaka also failed to understand why his land was always referred to as a third world and others first world. He did understand that people worldwide could see the sun rising from the east to west, the skies were the same, it rained everywhere, and every person had the same red liquid passing through their veins and arteries, even though their bodies have different shapes and colors. Lusaka realized that one's color and physical appearance played a significant role in one's place in society. Anyone with the color that came after the sunset is deemed not good enough by those with lighter skin. Those who live in communities labeled First World saw those in the Third World as being less than them in a way or another. The people in the Third World would spend their lives trying to prove to themselves and others that they belonged to the first class, but the measuring standards were outlined by the First World people. The history Lusaka learned and read about focused on painting the people of Alkebulan as uncivilized and illiterate. For the First World, Alkebulan was a place where one could successfully offer help if they wanted to feed their ego, get a good feeling, and so everyone wants to help the people. Lusaka discovered that long before he was born, Alkebulan welcomed two groups of visitors from the First World. The first group came from far distances to bring alternative language and ways of thinking. They came to spread the good news about a god of favorites who provided comfort and promises of riches if they obeyed them as masters. If not, a pool of fire awaited them. They instilled fear in Third World people, urging them to abandon their ways of thinking and how they looked at themselves and follow this new path. The second group was the most destructive. Years before they started their journey, the First World leaders had congregated to allow people to put their gold coins together and then choose one person to manage those gold coins they invested. It was the manager's responsibility to do everything in his power to profit from their investment, but yet not be held reliable for any damages they caused as they were protected. The leaders had come together to form an independent person without a soul. When these managers heard about Alkebulan's rich soils and precious stones, they started running in numbers to secure their share at all costs, even if it meant ending someone's life or holding them captive as slaves. This part of history left extensive damage to the people of Alkebulan who had previously made advances in cultivation, mining, engineering, medicine and construction. They had great kingdoms, kings and queens over thousands of years. In the kingdoms, children honored their parents and parents loved their children and provided for them. Each kingdom depended on an education system in which its people could understand the relationship between themselves and the universe. When Lusaka first came to Totem Island, he had to take lessons about the history and the culture of the island to adapt to his environment. He learned that Totem Island was the first place the groups had visited. Totem Island's history as a place of enslavement, genocide, rape and murder greatly mirrored Alkebulan. The managers hunted and killed Totem Island's original inhabitants, almost wiping out an entire population because of their skin color. After many years of slavery, brave young men and women stood up against the bloodshed and fought for the rights of their people, demanding they have their freedom back. Lusaka often took time to reflect on the present. Those previously persecuted seemed to live in peace and reconciliation, both on Totem Island and back home in Alkebulan. This was an excellent thing to witness and be part of. No one was in chains anymore, but despite these observations, Lusaka realized that their backs and spirits were broken. Like Lusaka and many from Alkebulan, Totem Island's first inhabitants suffered from an unrealistic feeling of general inadequacy and insufficient purpose. Many of them had their pride taken away, and their skin color seemed to doom them to a life of poverty and injustice. Although their physical bodies were no longer in chains, their minds were. In Alkebulan, people of the same skin color disliked and killed each other based on their culture, belief, and tribe. They judged people based on how much wealth they had accumulated for themselves and the material value they brought to their lives. The First World leaders had also created a society for their people to have whatever they desired, simply at the snap of their fingers. If they did not have it, or could not have immediate access to it, they would find someone or somewhere that did. They had the control and the power after all. Lusaka remembered one note he had received. It's impossible to cure yourself of greed, but you must fight it all the time in your heart. The voice was right, Lusaka thought. Greed divided and brought unhappiness between men and women, races and islands. It is a bag that contained everything terrible for the people who were not happy with who they were and what they had. Filled with emotions of pain and anger towards the brutality inflicted on his people, Lusaka blamed their current state of being on the visitors. Remembering the words from the Book of Wisdom, asking Lusaka to love his neighbor as he loved himself, he found it hard to do that and found it hard to dislike everyone who looked like them. Loving one's neighbor as one loved themselves was a truth Lusaka had grown with. It was a sign of humility, and he believed that that was what made everyone human. And if everyone did that, there would be no or fewer problems in the world. It is a thing that is simple to say but hard to do, he thought. But still, the question of how likely was it for one to love his neighbor as himself when he first does not love himself, came shooting through all the noise in Lusaka's head again. For a moment, Lusaka stood in shock as he took in events from around the world, how people in power went to great lengths to control others. Neighbors fought against neighbors, brothers fought brothers, and nations fought nations. This is how destructive being greedy and not loving oneself can be, he thought. Lusaka observed that the more he tried finding someone to blame for everything, the more he felt hopeless and lost power. He had grown up understanding that nothing was 100% one's fault. In every problem, two people contributed to the problem, either knowingly or unknowingly. In the case of Alkebulan, it was like a story Lusaka had once heard of a man who welcomed a visitor to his house. To make the visitor happy, the man changed everything about his house to accommodate the visitor. Soon, the visitor would become part of the family and feel at home. The man would open up to the visitor about all matters of the household. Later on, the visitor would start running the household affairs. When the man is not looking, the visitor will give the man's family gifts and sweets. Soon enough, the visitor would take over the man's family, leaving him with nothing. Knowing all he had learned, Lusaka was yet to let go of this feeling of betrayal. He would often remind himself that he is at war, that someone had to pay. The voice started clapping and laughing at Lusaka. Yes, you have got it right. But tell me, are you still going to fight the same way your ancestors fought, with spears and shields when the others came with guns? Lusaka saw fighting that way would not work in his favor or his people. Lusaka observed the military's advances since his ancestors' time and observed that the war was no longer physical but mental for his people. Those who did not develop their mind automatically lost. Control of information that controlled how people thought and what they trusted was a truth through powerful channels by the oppressors was the new slavery. After researching and trying to understand himself and the people's lives he wanted to impact, Lusaka discovered that everyone, including himself, focused on cutting the grass of poverty from the surface without looking down on its causes. Just like cutting a tree, yet leaving its roots, what's needed is not to cut, but uproot the problem. Lusaka's most significant challenge was first in mind. He realized that his way of thinking was everything, that it had greatly affected the outcome of his solutions. He realized that providing a solution to TED 801s would not be the end of the fight, but the beginning. Knowing his own mind better and changing his worldview was the only way he could get to uproot all his problems and that of his people. After multiple attempts to help to bring his idea to life, Lusaka felt like he was selling sand in the desert. Everyone had plenty of TED 801 free mami water readily available anytime they wanted. For most of them, hearing about TED 801 was shocking. Still, he struggled to find someone willing to help with complete devotion, especially as it had just been an idea with nothing concrete to show for it. Many people were kind enough to decline working on the project without beating about the bush. And those like Berlin, who came with a lot of hope and suggestions, seldom stuck around long. As with his previous project, Lusaka spent time getting in touch with nearly 300 people, but nothing materialized. After the research Lusaka had uncovered and come to know about, giving up on this idea was not a possibility. Besides, his problems had just multiplied. Slowly, Lusaka started accepting that he needed something more concrete to make the group and idea a success. No one would simply appear to help him just because he had an idea that he thought was right, and most of all, he did not expect people to feel sorry for him because of his situation. Lusaka noticed everyone wanted something in return. They needed to see the benefit in their investment, especially making as many gold coins as possible. Disappointed and downhearted, men have just taught you a lesson. As long as they thought you did not need them, offers came pouring in. The possibility that they might have to help you cash a few miserable pennies turned their friendship into indifference. Trust only in the Creator and in those who are with you through Him, the voice said to Lusaka. It reminded him of the apartment building he had cleaned and asked him if he had wondered how that apartment was built. One brick upon another. Thousands. One by one, and bags of cement, one by one, and blocks of stone, each of them insignificant compared with the massive whole, and beams of steel, and men working the same hours day after day. Have you seen how that structure was built? It asked again. But before Lusaka could put together an answer, the voice said, "By those little things put together." Lusaka remained strong-willed and determined to move the idea forward. He had to stay afloat, but having no right to work meant that he would not get closer to getting any proper and respectable work, but rather take whatever came his way. He had to forget everything he had achieved with the cleaning business and did all kinds of jobs to make ends meet and even save up small amounts of money to support his idea. At this moment, feeling ashamed of the jobs he did to make ends meet was not a question. No job work was too small, too big and too dangerous. Lusaka was no longer just working to put food on the plate, but had a bigger reason to work, meant he could do anything from cleaning to manual labor. He realized that the only way he would make it through life and his journey was by building as many relationships as possible. It was necessary whether he liked the job or not. Despite all this, Lusaka kept integrity and respect for himself as he worked. And once that was concluded, so was he, despite how badly he needed the job. During this time, Lusaka was introduced to coins by another friend he had recently met. He had stopped worrying about where his next coin would come from and focused on doing all he could do to move forward and build relationships. Keynes and his dad worked together in a family-owned business that supplied machinery around Totem Island. For 57 years, they started and grew the business from nothing to make millions of gold coins each year with over 100 workers. A few years before, the dad borrowed millions of gold coins from the bank and invested in new equipment, which ended up making huge losses and their company taking the biggest hit. Keynes, the son, was now rebuilding and rebranding the business. The dad was a man in his late 80s but seemed relatively healthy.